Benvenute e benvenuti. Sono Silvia Francescon, sono responsabile per l'agenda ecologia di Unione Buddista Italiana. Quest'oggi avremo una bellissima conversazione con il professor David Loy, autore di un libro, dell'ultimo libro che abbiamo pubblicato, che si chiama Ecodharma, insegnamenti buddisti per affrontare la crisi ecologica, e questa è la bellissima copertina del libro del professor Loy, che è qui con noi. Adesso parlerò in inglese, naturalmente. Hello, David. Welcome.
Thank you, Silvia, if I may. And let me just say, I'm really grateful, first of all, for the fact that you're publishing this book in Italian, but also for this invitation today. I'm very happy to join you for this conversation.
We are very, very happy to have you with us. And let me just introduce you to our public. Amongst the many things, you are a professor, a writer, of course, and a Zen teacher from the Sambo Zen tradition. You are also a co-founder of the new Rocky Mountains Ecodharma Retreat Center, located near Colorado, near Boulder in Colorado. And so I would also like to mention those who have translated in Italian. The book has been translated by Andrea Libero Carbone, and it is also enriched by an afterword by Tiziano Fratus. I would like to start with you, like honoring our beloved master Thich Nhat Hanh, who left his physical body recently. And I would like also to remind and remember that the second book that UBI Liber published is the beautiful book Chiamami con I miei veri nomi from Thich Nhat Hanh. The first book was the Dhammapada. The second book is this one from our Thai. And I would like to start from here and to ask you how much Thai has impacted you and all of us.
So, well said. I think he's had an extraordinary impact on all of us. And one way to say it is that, the Ecodharma book, which does quote him several times, is an example of what we now call socially engaged Buddhism. It's this this attempt, to bring Buddhist teachings to bear on the kind of social and ecological issues that we face today. And the true founder of engaged Buddhism was Thich Nhat Hanh. As I remember, he was the first one to actually use that term. And I think that was an inspiration to all of us. It started especially with his anti-war work. And that was the sort of original focus. But of course, Ecodharma has grown quite a bit since then. My feeling about Thich Nhat Hanh, in a way, it's similar to that of the Buddha, in the sense that, Buddhism isn't simply what the Buddha said, it's what he began. And we can say with socially engaged Buddhism too, that it's something that began with Thich Nhat Hanh, but it continues, and it's clear that it will continue, and that in this continuation, he continues to live for all of us. So I feel grateful to him in many ways. Yeah.
Yes, we are all grateful. And you in your book, there are several quotes, including, of course, from Thich Nhat Hanh. One of my favorite is, "Walk as if you were kissing the earth with your feet." And I think in this simple phrase, there's so much of his teaching. And so thank you for that. And of course, his presence is throughout the whole book. And I have to say that when I read the book, the English version, because the Italian has just been published, I said, okay, this is the book I was waiting for. Because after many years of study of environmental issues, always from a technical, scientific, or technological perspective, I found a book that resonates with me a lot because you address the root causes of the eco crisis, and it's also with some strong point of view, I would say, which I very much appreciated. When you say a life preoccupied with consumerism is incompatible with the Buddhist path. Wow, that's pretty much a call for all of us. And I would like you perhaps to tell us a little bit more about this.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that term, consumerism, because frankly, I think that we need to understand consumerism today as a kind of religion. If religion means, that's what teaches us what's really important about life and how to live, I think we have to say religion is the most important, maybe the most successful religion of all time, winning more converts more quickly because we have advertising. There are many people who go to church or temple or synagogue maybe one day a week, but what about the other 6 days? In other words, I think the real challenge for Ecodharma and genuine religiosity of any form is really the challenge of the religion of consumerism, which is, as we can now see, is really incompatible with the health and the well-being of the earth, as well as our own societies, of course.
Yes, absolutely. And perhaps can we say also that we are witnessing also to a sort of green consumerism? What do you think?
Well, yes. And I think there's a real danger there. If green consumerism means reducing our own carbon footprint, that's clearly very important, right? So we need to think about how we move around, how often we fly and take cars and so forth. For example, my wife and I, we have solar panels on our roof and we have an electric car. But I think one of the problems is that and really, I think it's due in part to fossil fuel corporations that have been successful in persuading us that the problem is basically to do with our individual consumption. And there's an element of that for sure, as I've just said, but we also need to recognize that we're facing institutional challenges. We're facing powerful corporations that have enormous influence on governments. And it's not enough to simply personally, individually try to reduce our carbon footprint. We also need to ask deeper questions about how we can actually challenge the economic and political power of some of these groups. I'm reminded of something Bill McKibben said when he was in Paris for the one of the conferences a few years ago. Somebody asked him, what can I do as an individual to address the climate crisis? And he said very simply, stop being an individual. We need to work together. And I think that's a really important challenge for our sanghas. We also need stronger Buddhist sanghas so that Buddhists, and Buddhism is just one example here, but Buddhists need to really work together, I think, more so than we have so far.
Yes, and once again, it was Thich Nhat Hanh saying that, and you mentioned this in the book, actually, the Buddha attained individual awakening. Now we need a collective enlightenment to stop the course of destruction. So this is a Sangha, right?
So.
Yeah. And what I do like a lot of this book is that you say that climate change is just the tip of an iceberg. And the bottom is very much, the base of this iceberg is very much, you know, the loss of many other things, the loss of biodiversity, industrial agriculture, which, by the way, amounts to 30% of global emissions, and many other situations of pollution. But also you talk about intersectionalism and how addressing the eco-crisis has to do with the social crisis as well. And if I may say, this is very personal, but perhaps we can also use the word of colonialism and extractivism. What do you think? I actually think that climate change is the result of a colonialistic attitude.
I would agree, for sure. Although I see what we have seen over the last couple centuries as colonialism and now neo-colonialism, with the way that the economic order of the world is organized, I think that's very definitely a part of it. But I think we need to see it as part of this larger relationship to the earth. I mean, Buddhism, as we know, from the beginning, it has emphasized so clearly the interconnectedness of everything. And I think the climate crisis is a really good example of that. As you said, I emphasize in the book that the issue of carbon emissions is just the tip of this iceberg, urgent though it is. I mean, we really have to focus on that, but we also have to see that just in ecological terms, the iceberg includes what you said about agricultural issues. It includes loss of biodiversity, the fact that so many plant and animal species are disappearing so quickly. It includes so many forms of pollution in the air and the water and the earth and our bodies, plastics. I mean, we can go on and on. It's so important to emphasize this, because otherwise we might think if we just sort of can switch from fossil fuels quickly enough, then we can sort of keep on doing what we've been doing. And I think when we look at this in the larger context, we can see that it's a much greater challenge that really requires us to, rethink how it is that we live on the earth. In addition to the ecological, I mean, many people have been pointing out it's definitely people of color and people in the poor nations that are already suffering the most from the ecological crisis in terms of droughts and floods. And we have now so many millions of climate refugees. And as we know, it's only going to get worse. And, it's also a class problem. It really raises questions about neoliberal capitalism. The fact that I read recently, which really brought this home to me, is that in the 25-year period between 1990 and 2015, right? In that period, the top 1%, the richest 1% of the world's population were responsible for twice the carbon emissions of the whole of the bottom 50% of the earth. Please think about that for a moment. What that really shows us is that the ecological crisis is also a class crisis. And again, once you delve more and more deeply into it, you can see that it really raises really important questions about our economic system and the relationship between that economic system to the earth.
Yes, and I think we should also start talking about climate justice, including in the international negotiations, which has just started. But I do think, and it's not just loss and damage, it's not just the rich giving, money, resources to the poorest countries, it has to do with the rule of law, with recognizing the impact and those who are most impacted by climate change and those who have been most responsible for it. So it is a question of justice. And I think, I mean, if we look at COP26, and the image that struck me is, the European Commissioner, Special Envoy for Climate Change, Timmermans, showing the picture of his nephew and being worried about his nephew. But and there was the speech by, the Prime Minister of one of the island states, and he was already under the water. So this also gives the sense of where we are with this crisis. For us in the global north is very much the future, maybe our kids or our, grandchildren. But for some people, it's a matter of survival today.
Oh.
And I think this poses many questions. And I also like the language that you have choose for your book. For example, you talk about, and this goes with what we said before, there is a UN conventional language for developing and developed countries, but you used overdeveloped countries. And I like to use the term impoverished countries. And I think Buddhism has, as you mentioned, a lot to say about this, because of the sense of non-separation and non-duality. And you say a lot about this in your book.
Well, one of the really important themes in the book is seeing that what Buddhism has always had to say about our individual situation, our individual predicament, is in fact paralleled. It seems to be that it's the same predicament that we are facing collectively today. What I mean by that is that Buddhism talks about dukkha, suffering. That's where the path begins. And ultimately you can say the most problematic suffering is the delusion of a separate self. This is one of the really essential teachings, right? The anatta teaching of the Buddha, that the sense of separate self that we normally have is a delusion, or in more contemporary language, we can say it is a psychological and social construct. And we can understand the Buddhist path as helping us deconstruct that sense of alienated self and helping us to let go of ourselves so we can realize our interdependence or even our non-duality with other people and the rest of the world. And I find it fascinating that it really seems to be the same problem we're facing today ecologically, right? The sense of self isn't simply something that applies to individuals. We have collective senses of self as well. And in this case, I think the sense of alienated self is modern civilization, which feels separate from the earth and therefore feels that somehow our own species, our own social well-being is separate from the well-being of the rest of the natural world. So basically what I'm arguing there or talking about in the book is understanding that at the core of the ecological crisis is the same thing that Buddhism has always focused on, which is this delusion of separation. And that if we're really going to resolve the problem, we have to understand that and look for ways to overcome that sense of duality as well.
So maybe Buddhism doesn't say much, of course, about climate change per se, because the Buddha didn't have that problem 2,500 years ago. But maybe it's the how that is what Buddhism can offer in this respect?
Yes, if I had to pick out the single most important teaching or implication of Buddhism for the ecological crisis, what I would pick out is the Bodhisattva path. Sometimes I call it the new Bodhisattva path, because I think we need to understand it in a somewhat different way than the tradition has. Or we can call it the ecosattva path. But I really think that what Buddhism shows us there is really a powerful way to respond to the ecological crisis, right? I mean, the Bodhisattva path has always had two aspects, in that Bodhisattvas continue to work on their own personal transformation, meditation, whatever their practice may be. But Bodhisattvas also realize that that in and of itself, it's not sufficient. That, we're not just in following this path for our own peace of mind or our own awakening. And if you think about it, this development into a bodhisattva concern is natural. As we follow the path and begin to wake up, more and more we realize we overcome the delusion of self, and we realize our interconnection with other people. And naturally, out of that, our concern for the well-being of other people also grows. So bodhisattvas work on their own transformation. At the same time, they realize that's not separate from the transformation for everyone, and indeed transformation in the way that our civilization relates to the earth. And to me, I mean, we can go into some of the details, and the book does that, but I think that's basically what's called for at this particular point. It's really important, I would say, for Buddhist practitioners not to think of social engagement of any sort, whether ecological or not. We shouldn't think of that as a distraction from our practice. In fact, I'd say it's just the opposite. It's an essential part. And in some ways, we can say even the most essential part of our practice now, to be engaged. And it's with that engagement that I think we often most powerfully overcome our sort of self-preoccupied usual habits, and we become more compassionate, more selfless. We integrate that engagement is how we integrate the kind of insight that the Buddhist path has always emphasized. And clearly that sort of engagement is more and more necessary today. Actually, in the book, I go so far as to say that if Buddhist practitioners don't want to engage with social challenges like ecological ones, if they simply want to sort of meditate and focus on their own equanimity, their own peace of mind, then Buddhism isn't what the planet needs right now. But what the book has tried to show, of course, is that Buddhist teachings and practices have a great deal to offer that can help us today in trying to respond appropriately to the challenge. I keep saying respond appropriately because I'm actually quoting there a famous Zen story. One of the Chinese Zen masters, Unman, he was asked, what's the fruit of a lifetime of practice? How do we change? What changes for us? And in his response, he didn't talk about transcending the world or attaining nirvana. He simply said, the fruit is responding appropriately. And that's what our practice can and should help us to do. We don't try to transcend the world and escape its dukkha, but rather through our practice, as we're able to sort of let go more of our self-preoccupied ego, we become more and more able to respond appropriately to the kind of challenges that we face today.
Yes, thank you for this. And respond appropriately. And sometimes because we receive so much information and and news and bad news and the state of the world, we can also fall in what we can call a phenomenon of eco-anxiety or anger or, frustration. And you talk about this, among the appropriateness of the response, perhaps there is also this, how the practice can help overcome this anxiety and perhaps transform it into energy for activism. What do you think is the role of communication, and how we can respond appropriately, both inside ourselves through the practice to overcome this anxiety, perhaps, but also how we can communicate? Sometimes it's difficult also for me to strike a balance between telling the truth, and what's going on, and the temptation to go into the blame and shame and anger and, those things, and ending up with a divisive communication.
So,
do you have any advice for me?
Well, I can say a few things. Whether anyone will find them helpful or not, I don't know. Responding first to your question or your concern about anxiety, I think this speaks to what Buddhism has to offer, most directly. I mean, many of us, maybe most of us, are familiar with social activists. And of course, the great problem there is that it's a very difficult path. People tend to burn out. They get frustrated. They get angry. As you say, there's a lot of anxiety in that. And that's where meditation, Zazen, as we call it in Zen, can really be especially important, that it can really help us sort of become aware of that anxiety, but also, because meditation is so much about letting go, finding a place where we're not, anxiety becomes problematical when there's a fear, and then we seize on the fear and we make it grow and we become preoccupied and it fills our head. And of course, meditation is really about letting go. So even though it's natural that there are moments of fear and anxiety that come up, we don't get caught up and carried away by them in the same way. So I think that may be, that's one of the great contributions, clearly, of something like Buddhism to the situation that we face today. The other thing that you touched upon, without naming it directly, but I think you were sort of implying it, it's this question of grief. I think that many of us have been traumatized, well, in many ways over the last couple of years. COVID certainly hasn't helped, but that's on top of political and also especially what we can see happening to the earth. And for many of us, there's a kind of a grief that we've been holding inside. And a really important part of Ecodharma, I think, is getting in touch with our grief, not denying it, not repressing it, but actually openly acknowledging it and feeling it. This is especially important, I think, to be able to do this with other people. You raised the question of communication, to share our concern with other people. When I lead Ecodharma retreats up at our Ecodharma Center here in Colorado, we have a process where we go out in the natural world. We really attune to what's going on. We get in touch with the trees and the meadow, the wildflowers, the river. And we also experience our gratitude for them, feel the gratitude. And only then, after having sort of lived together, practiced together for several days, only then are we ready to sort of open up and share our grief with each other. And that communication is extremely powerful. As long as we repress the grief, there's something paralyzing about it. But if we can share it and acknowledge it with other people, then it brings us together, and it can be very empowering or even liberating. I think that's a very important thing to realize. And the other thing I'd want to distinguish, the book tries to do this, it's important not to confuse grief with despair. You know, from a Buddhist perspective, this duality that we tend to get caught up in when we think about the future, you know, we tend to alternate between hope and despair. For Buddhism, that's a head trip. As Joanna Macy says, Buddhism isn't about hope. In fact, she says there isn't even a word, there's certainly no emphasis on hope. Rather, the emphasis is on feeling our grief, feeling gratitude, and being motivated for love, for love, by love. That's something that is much more embodied. It's much more here and now. You know, we don't know what's going to happen in the future. There's this great don't know. And yet, moment by moment, we can respond appropriately when what we do is motivated by this, by the love that lies at the basis of both gratitude and grief. You know, you could say grief is the price we pay for love, and it's important for us to feel it and to. And the wonderful thing about grief, I realize I didn't say it, but ironically, grief can really help us cut through a lot of the addictions, distractions of our life. You know, it's so easy to get caught up in so many things, and grief really pushes us to ask, what's really important? What's really important about my life? How do I really want to live? What do I want to do with these years that are given to me? They can really help clarify and focus us. And so in that sense, I think it can be very beneficial.
Yeah, thank you so much for this. Thank you for the encouragement to practice in nature. I think that nature heals, actually, and is a teacher and is the mother. And also you mentioned fear and love. And I have to say that the book also comprises some annexes. And one of these is the Buddhist declaration back to 2009, if I recall well. And some of the things written there are still valid, but something that really suits me was our action shouldn't come from fear, but from love. And I think this is going to be valid for long time, infinite time, I think. The very last question, David. There is something that has been accompanying me since I've read your book, and perhaps is a little bit more difficult to comprehend for a Western mind. And you say, in the path of the bodhisattva or ecosattva, practice practice of acting without attachment to the result. Because our consumeristic way of living has to do also with, being, productive, achieving that goal, and, have that kind of reward and that kind of competitive attitude where we have to win something in order to say that we have achieved something. But with the eco crisis, we are a little bit challenged here. And I really like this, and I want to also thank you for writing about it, and not be attached to the result of our actions.
In many ways, this stands out for me too as the single, let's just say one of the very, very important characteristics of bodhisattvas, that they are not attached to what we do. And that's always been emphasized in the various Buddhist literature, and I think that's especially important today because, of course, we all feel we all feel overwhelmed. And on an individual level, what can I do that's going to make it, what's going to make any difference? I think it's clear that when we open up and really feel what's going on now, especially in the context of our meditation practice, we're called upon, to become ecosattvas. We're called upon to act. But in this larger context that Zen emphasizes so much of don't know mind, that we really don't know what's possible. Clearly, our task is to do the very best we can without being able to know whether what we do is going to make any difference whatsoever. Now, normally, that's a very, very difficult, maybe almost impossible thing to do. But because we can be grounded in the meditation practice, that can give us the perspective that can help us let go of preoccupation with the results. It doesn't mean that we are casual. It doesn't mean, oh, I don't care what happens. We still need to do, we're called upon to do the very best we can. But given the situation we're in, there's a real unclarity about whether that's going to have any impact at all. Maybe one way to say it is this way. We can think about what we do as our gift to the earth. Our gift to the earth. And like every real gift, if you give a gift because you expect something in return, that's not really a gift, right? I mean, a real gift is here. And so I think that's what we're called upon to do what we can. What's going to come out of it? We don't know. Maybe nothing, maybe it'll make a difference. Either way, that's okay. We're doing the best we can. And I think that's really important to our practice and to our engagement with the world. The other thing I'd like to add to this very briefly, if I may, as a result of the book, I've received quite a few people ask me, I really want to become engaged. I want to be an ecosattva, but I don't know what to do. What should I do? And the issue, of course, is that, well, each of us is different. Our situation is different. And it's not as though I can tell them what they should do. But what I've started teaching as a response to that is a kind of a 3-part meditation that I think can help us decide. The 3 parts are simply, number 1, reflect deeply on what you have to offer. In many ways, it may be the same as what everyone else has to offer, but there's probably going to be unique qualities, and it's important to acknowledge them, and maybe unique limitations as well. What do I have to offer? The second meditation, turning outside, what are the real possibilities for me where it seems like I can make a contribution? Here in Colorado, for example, a big issue is fracking, gas fracking, and naturally many ecological activists are engaged with that, but there's many other issues as well. And then third and finally, having, as it were, assimilated or digested those first 2, what do I have to offer, what's possible? The most important, I would say, is really going deep within and asking ourselves, what tugs at my heart? Where does my love, where does my compassion really want to go? And this isn't a kind of ego decision, but it's really asking deeply, deeply inside ourselves, what pulls at us. And I think it's really important for all of us, insofar as we want to be engaged, is to reflect on these 3 questions and maybe return to them even as our life changes and as our circumstances change. So thank you for allowing me to add that, but I think some people have found that can be quite helpful.
No, thank you for both for the encouragement and also for these reflections that I'm sure all of us will think upon. These 3 steps you also provided a tool to think about. So, David, I can't wait to see you in Italy. We have plans, and for actually have presentations in person in Italy of this beautiful book. And we are really looking forward to meeting you here. We will also have an Ecodharma retreat in Italy. And we are all very happy that you are accompanying us in this journey of the Ecodharma and the ecosattva. We are really planting the seeds.
Thank you, Silvia. Well, it really feels like we're part of the great, yes, the same Sangha, right? The same, working together here, and that feels wonderful. And I do look forward to that trip. I think it's next September, October.
Exactly.
That I'll be visiting and offering a retreat and giving some talks, and really look forward to meeting you and everyone on the staff at that time.
Thank you so much, David. Thank you once again, and thank you for sharing through your books the wisdom, the knowledge, and the love. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you for your support, Silvia, and thank you for everything you are doing to make that available to more people.
Thank you. Thank you.